Alyssa Farrick, and Jeff Plankenhorn.
Hey y'all, this is Tyranny of Southern Avenue. Join us this week in live performance on Mountain Stage.
Sunday from noon to 2 on 88.3 FM WAER.
We know you've got a lot to do in a day, and sometimes it may not be easy to tune in at exactly the right time to catch WAER News. But WAER News is always available, wherever and whenever you are, without a paywall. Visit our website to use our live stream, or catch up on local and national news, as well as podcasts on our website at WAER.org.
Back out to Elijah Moore, left wing three, he nails it. A quick 2 for 2 from three-point range. Elijah Moore has got Syracuse's 6, a 6-2 lead. Syracuse on top, a minute 30 in.
Syracuse 95, Boston College 86. You're listening to the double overtime here on WAER. Alex Burstein joined alongside Skylar Wilkes. A triple overtime win for the Orange. Those Elijah Moore threes feel like they were hours ago, days ago.
They really were, Alex, because he barely played in the second half, which was really shocking to me overall. I mean, you look at the minutes on a grand scheme of things, and he played just 6 minutes.
And we're joined now by someone who was there to experience all of those threes and all of those other misses for the Orange. Max Gifford, our reporter. Max, how you doing? Is your breath caught up after that game?
Man, I feel like I've been in the Dome for an entire day at this point, Alex. Thank you guys for having me on. I mean, I got to the Dome around, I think, 1 o'clock today, so this is hour number 5. This is hour number 5.5 I'm on right now.
That's a long day at the Dome, but we're glad you survived. We're glad you got to see a very good game. But I think the first question we have for you, Max, is, I mean, we talked about it. Syracuse was up double digits in the second half. What changed there at the end, those last 5-6 minutes, that let BC get back into this game?
Well, there's a lot of different perspectives I could come from here. I could be the old man yelling at the cloud and say, well, if they just made their free throws, then this game would have been over hours ago. Which, true, but also Boston College didn't make a ton of free throws, so I'm not necessarily going to say that. But one of the things that I point to in particular, I don't think Syracuse would have been in this position if they would have left guys like J.J. Starling and Jair Davis in this game when they were up 9 in the second half. And not to mention that Elijah Moore did not play after the beginning of the second half. He did not play the entirety of overtime. I just asked Coach Autry about why a guy like Elijah Moore is not playing in some of those late game minutes. Granted, a lot of his comments were about how he played on the other side of the ball rather than his offensive game, because he was complimenting Elijah on how hot he was offensively.
Max,
today.
what did he say about when you asked him why Elijah wasn't playing?
He said because of things on the other side of the ball. He said he's been continuing to work to get better, but it was more of a defensive thing than an offensive thing. That was his sole reason for keeping him out in that second half.
I mean, did you feel like Syracuse got that much better at defense when he was out of the game? Was that visible?
No, I wouldn't necessarily say that they got better at defense, but what I'm pointing at, but that's why guys like Elijah Moore, not necessarily just Elijah Moore, but Jair Davis and J.J. Starling also weren't present or active on the court towards that late game sequences. And even in that first half, you had J.J. go out super early, and that's how BC kind of pulled back this game and made it a little close until J.J. came back into the game with about 4 minutes to go. So lots of flip-flopping in this lineup, and Red Autry was just kind of going back to, he's like, we felt comfortable with who we had out there when JJ wasn't out there. He said we thought that group had rhythm, and I don't remember the exact 5 at the top of my head, but I want to say it was something along the lines of like Kyle Cuff, Peter Majstorovic, Naheem McLeod, Jair Day. I don't think it was Jair.
Are you talking about the one with Lampkin and then Carlos is out there as well?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
I didn't love that lineup at all. I didn't think there was much scoring output.
Red loved it. He said that he thought that it had so much rhythm and that he wanted to get his best player out early, give him some rest, that it helped them down the stretch. Now, you could argue that it did because Starling ended with a team-high 28 points, but you also could have been done with this game much earlier.
So there was no regret about letting?
No, not at all.
That's
Not
wow,
at all.
That's interesting because that 4-minute stretch was when BC got back into the game.
Yeah, and also for a young player like Elijah Moore, that's got to be really demoralizing from a confidence level. You have 11 points. You're 3 for 3 from three.
And
you
the first
scored...
8 minutes of the first 8 points of the game
right.
also.
Exactly.
First double-digit performance since December. So
Right.
he hasn't had a double-digit performance in the year 2025 yet, and he basically doesn't play the rest of the second half.
Yeah, I tried to find the best way to ask Red about it because you don't want to ask, like, why didn't Elijah Moore play? I asked, what's the next step for him to play in those late-game situations? Because, I mean, you have to think it's a maturity thing at this point, and the fact that he has had such poor offensive showing. I mean, by the time he had those first 8 points, that was the same amount of points he had against Notre Dame a couple weeks ago. That was the last time he got up to 8 points, and it was in the first 3 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, just an unbelievable choice there because he's had a tough stretch this entire season, and you think that all the sayings go, the only way you can get better is to shoot out of a slump, and that's exactly what he did. That was the best start to a game we've seen out of Elijah Moore all year, as Syracuse narrowly gets the win here in a triple overtime, 95-86. Alex Burstein here with Skylar Wilkes and Max Gifford, as you hear in the dome as the buzzer goes off. You can join in on the conversation as well. If you have a question for Max, call in at 315-443-2011 or text in at 315-556-3929. Also interact with us on our socials at WAER Sports Talk. And Max, we talked a lot about Elijah Moore, and I know you said you don't want to be the old man crying at the cloud, but the free throws, they did matter in this game. Did Autry have anything to say about that after the game?
Yeah, so he was specifically asked about the JJ 1-and-1 that he missed towards the end of the game that would have ended the game probably an hour earlier. And his comments were he kept his focus on the game. That JJ kept his focus on the game and kept going. And as a player like JJ, you have to be able to move on. He just said keep playing was the message to the guys over and over, even after they missed free throws. There wasn't any specific message to these players about free throws. It was just a motivational, yeah, keep going, keep playing. We're still in it.
Oh, that's so helpful when you're shooting.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it ended up being 18 for 32.
Yep.
This is kind of like that Texas game in Brooklyn where they went 9 for 18. But except that's a Texas team that has gotten votes in the AP poll and not one of the worst teams in the ACC. So it kind of mattered. Again, forget about the fact that you went to triple overtime. Forget about that the game could have been over earlier. It's almost inexcusable.
You can't be missing that many shots.
By the end of the second overtime, the only person that was perfect on free throws was Chris Bell, who was 2 for 2. Other than that, every single other player had at least missed one free throw.
That second half, they went 4 for 11.
Yes.
In 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know how you can gloss around that or gloss over it the way you seemingly made it seem like Autry did.
He did. He really, I mean, I would love to hear his comments if they would be different after a game, if they would have lost this game in triple overtime, especially because you look at situations like that JJ 1-and-1. I mean, if he makes one of those, he makes one of those, he wins the game. Also, if he misses maybe both of them, that costs you the game much earlier.
But, I mean, you mentioned, Max, this isn't a new problem, and Syracuse has lost games because of free throws this year, and we have gotten that same response out of Autry. Nothing has changed. I mean, I mentioned this earlier. A couple of weeks ago, it seemed like they had kind of figured out the free throw game, but it seems like they're back to ground zero right now.
And the problem is, Alex, how do you teach free throws?
Practice.
But you're in February. There's a month left in the season. What can you possibly do to try to improve your free throw shooting from here on out? You just have to keep shooting free throws, but you don't want Syracuse at the free throw line at this point because you're afraid that they're going to go 50% or they're just going to miss both of them.
It was almost at a point tonight where you knew that they weren't going to make both of them. Like a chance to seal the game. You're like, oh, no way that they're going to at least miss one. Jair Davis he went 4 for 6. He was an 80% shooter last year at Delaware and has dropped to under 70% this year. And I would really love to know if there is a specific thing. Maybe it's playing in the dome. Like, I don't know what it is that's completely thrown off that part of his game.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. Autry was probably the highest in his post-game presser on Eddie Lampkin and Jair Davis.
Well, Jair Davis, I totally
He
understand.
had a great game.
Yeah, totally. But It was funny. Right before I got on here, I was listening to you guys talking to Jackson. First, I'd like to point out him saying that Naheem McLeod is a more versatile defender than Eddie Lampkin is an absurd take. Say what you want about sort of the late game situation where Eddie Lampkin was in and was essentially standing on the far post when BC needed a 3 to win. I mean, throw that out the window. Eddie Lampkin still had 18 rebounds in this game. Was he that much of a difference maker on defense in overtime? Not necessarily.
Or offense in overtime.
Yes, but that's because Autry kept taking him out, and that was sort of his plan for Lampkin in overtime. You guys were also talking about it a little. 49 minutes for Eddie Lampkin.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the biggest guy on the court. That has to be a career high in minutes for Lampkin.
Yeah, I mean, he played against Cal, I think it was, where he had his career high in regulation, right? Like overtime, he's played more. But here, now you go into this game, 49 minutes. And another thing, though, is that Naheem McLeod, not that I agree with your take, Max, that he is not as versatile as Eddie Lampkin, but it seems like, especially against a team like BC where the talent isn't as supreme as even against the number 2 team in the country, he just put up that performance against Duke. Why is he playing 5 minutes?
It's a great question. I mean, the funny thing is, it was not a question really asked about McLeod and his playing time. I think might be just because he really hasn't really been a factor in pretty much any of these games this season except for the Duke game, which was a blowout from pretty much the start. So he didn't really have to answer to anything about Naheem, and I think what his take on it was, and I guess not necessarily talking about Naheem, but more talking about Eddie. He was saying Eddie doesn't want breaks. He said he was in it the entire way. He said, I didn't think about taking him out except for those later game stages in overtime when we took him out for the defensive sequences rather than the offensive sequences. So I think he's just trying to milk as much as he can of Lampkin out of him, and it seems like Lampkin is really into it and wants to be in this game.
What confuses me is after the Duke game, talking in the locker room with McLeod, he says that he has this bigger role in that game because Donnie Freeman is out. But, I mean, Freeman's been out for over a month now, and we'll get to that in a second. But one game in the midst of this long stretch without, he has a high jump in minutes, plays well against a March Madness contender for the championship, and now he's back to single-digit minutes? I just don't see a reason for that.
Yeah, there's going to be a ton of questions after this game. The fact that, I mean, coming into this game, I probably would have said our segment would have probably been a lot of answering questions. What's that next step without Donnie? I know that question's been kind of answered over the last couple of weeks, or I guess the day-to-day, because he was the longest day-to-day of all time. I guess we can call it officially. Now out, officially sidelined for this season. But even with that said, you mentioned Naheem, still not really getting as much playing time, really getting into the mix. You don't know if maybe that's just an end of game. You haven't seen Naheem in some of these late game sequences, so you don't know how he's going to perform compared to a guy like Eddie, who again has been in an NCAA tournament environment, has played down the stretch in some of these big games, and has shown to be effective.
Well, Max, I know you were in the Dome, saw all the loud fans in a long game, but we do have a caller on the line, Owen from Liverpool, to talk about some traditions with the Orange. Owen, what do you have for us?
Hi, thanks for having me on. I just wanted to jump in and a little bit about the stand and clap tradition. Personally, I have always despised it, and today it felt like salt in the wound. And I watch a Syracuse basketball team blow a 5-point lead at the foul line with 20 seconds left, and my response is supposed to be to stand up and clap to start overtime. I think it's an embarrassment. I think the only thing that can happen with the stand and clap is you embarrass yourself. It never looks cool, and if you ask me, it's one of the worst traditions in college basketball.
Would you rather
I think it's time to get rid of it.
Would you rather booed to start overtime?
Honestly, the way this season's gone, I was just looking. Ken Palm's got BC as the worst Power 4 team in the country.
Yeah, they're not great.
Today, maybe it's worth booing, right? You're trying to get to 11 wins. You're looking at a team that consistently disappoints. I think this is a roster that has talent, and coaching consistently leaves things short. Today felt like, I hate booing. I never want to boo, but there was a time to boo. I think watching that meltdown to end regulation warrants the closest I've been to booing at a game.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Owen, because I think for a lot of Orange fans this season, because the year has gone so bad, it's almost a situation of here we go again. Like, it's just deja vu every time the Orange are in these late game scenarios. And as far as the comments on the stand-in clap, a lot of fans just stood up and left right before overtime even began. So
Yeah.
Say what you want about the ones who actually stayed and clapped for overtime. I was more disappointed in the fact that it's late game. It's a late game. BC still was in range of coming back in this game, but so many fans just got up and left the game.
Oh, and we thank you for calling in, and definitely a frustrating time for Orange fans and traditions that have been out there for a while, but now some questions being brought in. Max, one more question for you, because obviously the big storyline of today is what just happened in the game, but before we did find out Donnie Freeman out for the year, and questions about his future with the Orange are now really, really big, if he's even going to play another game for Syracuse ever again. Was there anything after the game said about Donnie Freeman and his future with this team?
So I had to leave a little bit early. As far as I know from the beginning, I did not get any comments on Donnie. I'm currently sort of scrolling through our Twitter at WAR Sports Talk to see if any comments were, and I'm getting word right now from one of our play-by-play broadcasters today, Jordan Leonard, that there was nothing said about Donnie Freeman. There was nothing asked about Donnie Freeman either. Now, I'm sure potentially in the players' locker room there might be some questions swirled around to players about, what it means to lose a guy like Donnie. But I think the truth is there is a lot of question marks that remain for this team. And we've had a chance, Reds had a chance to kind of answer them the last couple of weeks with the Mount. Now it's just you have to sort of crawl to get to the end of the year at this point. You only have about a month left. It's not going to make too much of a difference, I don't think, in their record. You have 11 wins by February. Would Donnie Freeman have made that much of a difference with a month left to play in the season?
Probably not.
It's a good question to ask, but I think he would have. It makes what happens there is you have to play more Lampkin and potentially now more McLeod. You get more depth almost at that big man position where you're not running Eddie Lampkin for 35 minutes a game, and because he's not consistent enough offensively where he can contribute the way he did tonight.
But you have to give him a little credit. I mean, he only had like 8 total points in his last 2 games, and then to come out and have 14 points
against an injured Chad Venning, yes.
Yeah, before the second half ended.
Again, it was against an injured Chad Venning, but I see your point.
Well, Max, we thank you so much for taking some time out of your super, super long day at the Dome. We hope you can finally get out into that fresh, crisp Syracuse air. That was Max Gifford joining us from the Dome after Syracuse's triple overtime win over Boston College, 95-86. Keep Syracuse right now in the mix of getting into the ACC tournament. And Skylar, running out of time here on the double overtime, but I think it's time for some final thoughts. What's kind of your biggest takeaway from today's game?
My biggest takeaway, Alex, and I'm not necessarily going to say with the same passion that Jackson did, but this isn't a win. Sure, it's a win in the win column, but that's just about it. You played, like Ken Pom said, the worst Power 5 team in their rankings, and you went to triple overtime. You shot 56% from the free throw. You missed 14 shots. You almost missed as many free throws as you made. That is completely unacceptable. And you made this a triple overtime game when it could have been over with 10 minutes left even in the game itself, in regulation. And you end up going to 3 different overtimes, blown opportunity after blown opportunity, bad shot selection, costly turnovers, and you got manhandled on underneath the boards as well. Eddie Lampkin, sure, he got 18 rebounds, but there were times where he was out-physicaled by guard Deion Brown. This was, sure, again, like I said, it may show up as a win in the win column, so you're at 11 wins, hooray, but this is absolutely not a moral victory, the fact that you had to go to triple overtime with Boston College.
I completely agree with you. I mean, there's not much positives to take out of this other than J.J. Starling, and that's why, to me, my final thought here, J.J. Starling deserves better. You go back to that Youngstown State game, the other long overtime game Syracuse had. They won that game because J.J. Starling scored 38 points in 49 minutes. That's in the start of the season. Anything can happen. Broad horizon. Syracuse is undefeated. You come to today, J.J. Starling scores 28 points in 42 minutes, and not a single other player in 50 minutes of game time scores 20 points. That is not acceptable. J.J. Starling transferred to Syracuse, is close to his hometown, has been playing his heart out this season through injury to get onto this court and to will Syracuse to wins. And he does it time and time again. And when he has one bad game, everyone's like, what's happening to J.J. Starling? How do you have single digits? Today he showed he's the only real day-to-day competent basketball player on this squad. 28 points against Boston College should be an expectation for most of these Syracuse starters because of a team like Boston College that's not going to make the ACC tournament. And simply put, J.J. Starling deserves much better out of this team.
You know, he missed some time with a broken hand. I'm surprised his back isn't going to start giving out because he's been carrying this team even though they're not really winning games. I do like what Jair Davis did today. I think he's a really, not underrated because I feel like people are aware of him, but even if it doesn't pop out on the stat sheet, which 16 points is very solid, it's just the energy. He's kind of like an Energizer bunny when he's out there springing up for rebounds and playing aggressive defense. And that fadeaway that he has in like the low block area, it's beautiful. It's almost Dirk Nowitzki-esque in a way. And so Jair Davis, who has been in and out of the starting lineup all season, I really like him as maybe potentially going up to that second option in scoring behind J.J. Starling. But Alex, you're absolutely right. J.J. Starling, without Donnie Freeman now for the rest of the year, I mean, he doesn't have as much help as he deserves. He has really put his heart and soul on the line for his team, for this city that he so proudly calls home. And, you know, sure, he missed that free throw at the end of the game, but that overtime,
that's one shot.
He took over. I mean, he was going right to the basket. He was drawing the fouls. He was making it hard on the Boston College defense. J.J. Starling has really been everything that Syracuse has wanted and more.
Well, Syracuse escapes with a victory today, 95-86 over Boston College, one of the low feeders in the ACC. Next up, though, a team even lower than them, Miami. Syracuse takes on the Hurricanes Tuesday, February 11th. Our coverage here on AER starts at McClure Modeling Countdown to tip-off at 6:30, and the dot for that 3:15 p.m. tip-off will go until 7:15 with our reporter we just heard from, Max Gifford and AJ Myers. And then also tomorrow, more basketball coverage. It's a whole weekend of hoops. Syracuse taking on Wake Forest in women's hoops action. Super Bowl Sunday matchup, McClure Modeling Countdown to tip-off starting at 1:30. That game begins at 2 and the dot until 6 p.m. with Jared Valentin and Dan Papillo. A busy weekend of hoops, Skyler.
Absolutely, and you know, Syracuse women's basketball came off a big road win against Virginia Tech, trying to keep it in the win column here at home.
It's going to be a busy weekend. We hope you can join us for all of the hoops coverage as Syracuse tries to rebound on the men's side and try to get a victory on the women's side. Some thank yous to hand out before the end of today's double overtime to our wonderful producer, Ryan Bridges. Manning the board, our engineer, Sam Reese. You just heard from him, our reporter, Max Gifford, and our desk, Jason Stalakis, Jack DiNapoli, and Evan Edmonston. And the hoop's not over. You can tune in to our sister station, Z89, tonight for the Media Cup. Us at WAER taking on the friendly folks at the Daily Orange. I heard you might be getting some minutes, Skyler.
I hope so. If our head coach Ian Nicholas lets me.
That is just about all the time we have for today, though. That's a 10 p.m. tip tonight, and plenty of basketball coming up the next couple of days here on WAER. But that's all the time we have for right now. The final score from today's matchup, Syracuse 95, Boston College 86. For Skylar Wilkes, I'm Alex Burstein saying goodnight.